After the children of Israel had wiped out the southern nations who attacked them, we continue our reading in Joshua chapter 11. It came to pass, when Jabin, king of Hazor, heard these things, that he sent to Jobab, king of Madon, to the king of Shimron, to the king of Akshaph, and the kings who were from the north, in the mountains, in the plain south of Chinneroth, in the lowland, and in the heights of Dor on the west, to the Canaanites in the east and the west, the Amorite, the Hittite, the Perizzite, the Jebusite in the mountains, and the Hivite below Mount Hermon in the land of Mizpah. So they went out, they and all their armies with them, as many people as the sand on the seashore in multitude, with very many horses and chariots. And when all these kings had met together, they came and camped together at the waters of Merom to fight against Israel. But the Lord said to Joshua, "Do not be afraid because of them, for tomorrow about this time I will deliver all of them slain before Israel. You shall hamstring their horses and burn their chariots with fire." So Joshua and all the people of war with him came against them suddenly by the waters of Merom, and they attacked them. And the Lord delivered them into the hand of Israel, who defeated them and chased them to the great Sidon, to the brook Misrephoth, and to the valley of Mizpah, eastward. They attacked them until they left none of them remaining. So Joshua did to them as the Lord had told him. He hamstrung their horses and burned their chariots with fire. Joshua turned backward at that time and took Hazor and struck its king with the sword. For Hazor was formerly the head of all these kingdoms, and they struck all the people who were in it with the edge of the sword, utterly destroying them. There was none left breathing. Then he burned Hazor with fire. So all the cities of those kings and all their kings Joshua took and struck with the edge of the sword. He utterly destroyed them, as Moses the servant of the Lord had commanded. But as for the cities that stood on their mounds, Israel burned none of them, except Hazor only, which Joshua burned. And all the spoil of those cities and the livestock the children of Israel took as booty for themselves. But they struck every man with the edge of the sword, until they had destroyed them, and they left none breathing. As the Lord had commanded Moses his servant, so Moses commanded Joshua, and so Joshua did. He left nothing undone of all that the Lord had commanded Moses. Thus Joshua took all this land, the mountain country, all the south, all the land of Goshen, the lowland and the Jordan plain, the mountains of Israel and its lowlands, from Mount Halak and the ascent of Seir, even as far as Baal-Gad in the valley of Lebanon, below Mount Hermon. He captured all their kings and struck them down and killed them. Joshua made war a long time with all these kings. There was not a city that made peace with the children of Israel, except the Hivites, the inhabitants of Gibeon. All the others they took in battle, for it was of the Lord to harden their hearts, that they should come against Israel in battle, that he might utterly destroy them, and that they might receive no mercy, but that he might destroy them, as the Lord had commanded Moses. At that time Joshua came and cut off the Anakim from the mountains, from Hebron, from Debir, from Anab, from all the mountains of Judah, and from all the mountains of Israel. Joshua utterly destroyed them with their cities. None of the Anakim were left in the land of the children of Israel. They remained only in Gaza, in Gath, and in Ashdod. So Joshua took the whole land, according to all that the Lord had said to Moses. And Joshua gave it as an inheritance to Israel, according to their divisions by their tribes. Then the land rested from war. My name's Arthur. Thank you for joining me as we've read together from Joshua chapter 11. The strategy that God used was to bring God's opponents against the children of Israel, and that the children of Israel, when their enemies rose up, shouldn't wait any longer for the attack to be on the terms of the enemy, but rather would go up to them and confront them quickly before they had time to get organised. I've just started reading a book from the First World War, and the whole winter, at the end of 1917, the Germans were getting organised to increase their attack to break the stalemate on the Western Front of trench warfare between the Allies and Germany, bringing their troops in from the east. But the children of Israel didn't wait for the actual attack to begin, and didn't fight on the terms of their opponents. Their opponents had very many people, very many horses, very many chariots, and so they were geared up for chariot warfare. The children of Israel had no chariots and no horses, so they could not win a chariot fight. They fought on their own terms and attacked before the chariots got organised. As soon as the enemies had amassed, they took the initiative to fight against them, and they routed. And I'm sure there's a principle there for us to learn from. Having defeated their enemy, they didn't then adopt their ways. They didn't take over their chariots and their war horses, but they burned the chariots and they hamstrung the horses so that they could no longer be used in battle. And it wouldn't be until 500 years later, when Solomon came to the throne, that Israel would take up warfare based on horses. For Solomon built huge stables as a basis of his defence system. But at this stage, the children of Israel trust the Lord, not in horses and chariots. Now, the territory covered was extensive because all the kings of the whole territory rose up together to fight against Israel. So the initial battle was fairly quick. The Israelites attacked those who had gathered at Merom and dispersed them and chased them. But then they had to systematically go through each of the cities, go through the whole territory to remove the enemies of the Lord. So the initial attack was quick, but tidying up, systematically going through all the cities and towns and claiming the territory took a considerable amount of time, and indeed it was several years before the process was complete. And we're also told that they took the cities where the giants lived. The Anakim were the giants. When the spies first came with Joshua 40 years earlier, they had been daunted by the giants that lived in several places. Now they destroy the giants. Except one family remains at Gath and Ashdod, and they would not be destroyed until David came along and Goliath opposed David, and David and his men would destroy that family. But Hazor was the only city after Ai and Jericho that was completely destroyed as a city. Otherwise, the children of Israel took over the cities, destroying the people, but keeping the infrastructure there for them to use. But as we mentioned before, it was to be a completely new society, and so God's instruction was to completely destroy the original inhabitants, showing no mercy, and none of those original inhabitants made any attempt to make peace with Israel, as the Gibeonites had. They made peace and they continued to live and be blessed in the land of Israel, but those who oppose miss out on that blessing, and their opportunity for repentance has passed. For God is not only a God of mercy and grace, but he is also a God of judgment. The time for mercy and forgiveness passes. So the land that was taken was all the way from Gaza in the south, right up to the foothills of Mount Hermon, way north of Galilee. And this was the land that the children of Israel could settle.